At 6:12 every morning, just as the sun bled soft gold across the quiet streets, Daniel Hale pushed open the door of Mel's Corner Cafe with his 4-year-old daughter asleep against his shoulder. He barely slept these days, juggling 2 jobs and parenting alone, but he always arrived early. He liked the hush of the morning. He liked the way hope felt easiest at sunrise. And he liked that he always saw her, the same woman sitting at the corner table, small and quiet, like someone trying to take up as little space as possible. A worn gray coat, frayed gloves in the winter, and a notebook she scribbled in endlessly. She looked like she belonged nowhere, except that table. And every morning, Daniel bought her breakfast. He didn't know her name. She never told him. She always smiled softly and whispered, "Thank you," as though the words cost her something. She'd place her notebook aside and eat slowly, almost gratefully. It wasn't charity, not to him. It just felt like something right in a world that had taken too much from too many, including himself. Maybe especially himself. Daniel hadn't expected to become a single father at 29. His wife, Emily, had passed away from complications after giving birth to their daughter, Lily. He remembered holding Lily in the hospital room while doctors tried and failed to keep Emily alive. In that single moment, his life split into a before and an after. The before had laughter, shared plans, and a future drawn in bright lines. The after was a mosaic of sleepless nights, daycare rejections, overdue bills, and staggering grief softened only by a baby girl who needed him more than he needed the world. Helping the quiet woman felt like a tiny piece of the old him, someone who still believed in goodness despite everything. Some mornings, he felt embarrassed that all he could offer was a cheap breakfast sandwich and a cup of coffee. But the way she looked at him, as though nobody had done something kind for her in a long, long time, kept him doing it. One morning, after 2 months of silent routine, she finally spoke more than 2 words. "You don't even know me," she said, staring at the coffee he'd handed her. "Why do you help me?" He'd put Lily in her booster seat and shrugged. "Because someone should." Her eyes softened, but the sadness in them deepened. "What if I'm not who you think I am?" Daniel smiled faintly. "I don't think you're anyone except someone who deserves breakfast." She blinked fast, and for a moment he wondered if she might cry. But instead she said, "My name is Mara." He said his name. She nodded once, like sealing a pact. Over the next weeks, something shifted. She became less shadow and more person, still guarded but willing to share tiny glimpses of who she was. She loved books but hadn't been able to buy one in years. She had a sister somewhere out of state but hadn't spoken to her in a long time. And though she never said why, every time he asked what she did for work, her face went still. She would say, "I'm between things," and quickly change the subject. Daniel didn't pry. Everyone had wounds. Hers were simply deeper than most. One day, she stayed longer than usual. Lily had crawled into her lap, babbling delightfully, and Mara had laughed, a real, bright laugh that made Daniel look up from his coffee. It was the first time he'd heard her sound alive. "You're good with her," he said. She brushed a strand of hair from Lily's forehead. "I've always liked kids. Do you have any?" Her smile faded. "No." When she looked away, the pain on her face was unmistakable. He dropped the subject. But the universe never lets peace linger for long. 2 weeks later, on a Wednesday morning, the quiet of Mel's cafe shattered. Daniel had just handed Mara her usual breakfast when the cafe door swung open and 4 large men in black suits filed inside. Behind them came a sharply dressed woman with a leather briefcase, her eyes scanning the room with surgical precision. Mara froze. Her fork fell from her hand. The lawyer approached their table. "Ms. Rowan," she said. Daniel felt Mara flinch. "No," she whispered. "Not here." The lawyer placed a folder on the table. "Your presence is required. You've ignored all attempts at contact." Mara shook her head violently. "You don't understand. I can't." "You can," the lawyer said firmly. "And you must." Everyone in the cafe stared. Daniel stood, instinctively placing himself between Mara and the strangers. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice low. The lawyer looked him over, assessing him like one assesses a harmless inconvenience. "This is a private matter." "It involves her," he said sharply. "That involves me." "Sir," she replied, "Ms. Rowan." Mara, Daniel corrected, is the sole heiress to Rowan Global Holdings. She disappeared 17 months ago. Her family has instructed us to bring her home. Daniel blinked. Heiress. He stared at Mara, expecting to see denial or confusion. Instead, she shut her eyes tight, as though trying to disappear into herself. I told you, she whispered, her voice cracking. I told you I didn't want to go back. The lawyer sighed. Your father is critically ill. He has days, maybe hours. If you don't return now, you'll never see him again. Mara covered her mouth, choking on a sound halfway between a sob and a gasp. Everything slowed. The cafe seemed to shrink around them. Daniel moved to her side. Mara, he said softly, do you want to go with them? She shook her head, then nodded, then shook her head again. I don't know. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. The lawyer placed a document in front of her. Your father wants to see you one last time. He also intends to transfer controlling shares to you. The estate cannot be finalized until you return. Estate, lawyers, bodyguards, an empire waiting for her. Nothing matched the terrified woman who scribbled in a worn notebook and lived on the brink of invisibility. Finally, Mara whispered, can I have a moment? The lawyer gave her 60 seconds. Mara looked at Daniel. I didn't lie to you, she said. I just couldn't tell you. Everything there is cold. Everyone wants something, my father included. When I left, it was the first time I could breathe. Daniel hesitated. Do you trust them? She let out a broken laugh. I don't trust anyone in that world. He took her hand, gently. Do you trust me? Her eyes searched his face. Slowly, she nodded. Yes. Then listen, he said. You don't owe anyone a life that crushes you. But you might regret not saying goodbye. And if you're worried about going alone, he gestured toward Lily, who watched them with wide eyes. We can come with you. For support. Her breath caught. You'd do that. You're my friend. Something in her cracked then, not in a breaking way, but in a freeing one. She squeezed his hand. Okay, she whispered. Okay. The lawyer raised an eyebrow when Daniel insisted on coming, but Mara stood straighter and said, he comes or I don't. That ended the argument. The ride to the massive Rowan estate felt like crossing into another universe. Daniel felt painfully out of place, an exhausted single dad in a jacket with a missing button, holding his daughter's small hand. Mara sat silent beside him, twisting the edge of her sleeve. When they entered the estate, servants whispered. The lawyer announced Mara's arrival, and soon they were led into a dim room where an elderly man lay frail in a hospital bed. Mara stepped forward, trembling. Hello, father. The man opened his eyes. For a moment, he seemed confused. Then he reached a shaking hand toward her. You came home. Mara stood stiffly, her jaw clenched. Daniel stayed back, giving her whatever space he could. You left, her father wheezed. I drove you away. I know that now. Mara swallowed hard. You controlled everything. Everyone. A weak smile crossed his lips. I thought that was the only way to protect you. It wasn't, she whispered. I'm sorry, Mara. His voice broke. I didn't know how to love you the way you needed. For a long moment, Mara didn't move. Then she leaned forward and took his hand. I forgive you, she said, tears streaking her face. I just wish we had more time. You do, he said faintly. That's why I'm leaving everything to you. Change the company. Change the family. Be better than I was. He passed away that night. The days that followed were a blur of condolences, corporate meetings, and media scrutiny. Daniel stayed nearby, taking care of Lily and offering quiet support whenever Mara's strength wavered. One evening, after a long day of legal discussions, Mara found Daniel on a balcony, Lily asleep on his chest. I don't think I can do this, she said softly. You can, he replied. But only if you do it your way. Not theirs. She took a shaking breath. I want to rebuild the company. Make it ethical, kind, human. She hesitated. I want to build something Emily would have been proud of. He blinked. You remembered her name. You say it with love, she said. I wanted to remember that sound. Their eyes met, gentle, uncertain, electric. Weeks later, the will was finalized. The company was hers. She offered Daniel a job, head of a new community outreach program, but he turned it down at first. I don't want anything from you, he said. I know, she replied. That's why I want you there. You help people without expecting anything back. You've done more for me than anyone in my life. After thinking it through, he accepted. The cafe where they'd first met became their morning tradition again, this time with fewer shadows, fewer secrets, and more laughter. Mara wasn't the quiet woman in a worn coat anymore. But she carried her notebook still, scribbling plans to change the world she now had the power to fix. One morning, months later, she looked at Daniel and said, "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't bought me breakfast that first day?" He smiled. "Not really. I'm just glad I did." "So am I," she whispered. Sometimes healing begins with nothing more than a cup of coffee, a warm breakfast, and someone who decides you're worth showing up for, even before you believe it yourself. And sometimes, that small act of kindness becomes the beginning of everything you never knew you needed.